Like a lot of kids of the 90s, I adored Pokémon.
Kids WB presents How to Become a Pokémon Master. Step 1. Start out as a Pokémon trainer like Ash. Step 2. Catch a Pokémon like Pikachu and keep him in a Pokéball. Step 3. Search for wild Pokémon. Step 4. Battle your Pokémon against wild Pokémon. If you win, now you got 2. Step 5. Repeat Step 4 until you catch them all. Pokémon, now on Kids... What do you mean, Step 6?
I remember the very first episode I watched of Pokemon. It was back when they used to show anime like that at like 7 a.m. Kids WB used to do that. They showed like these cartoons at ungodly hours.
Pokemon, today at 7:30.
And I remember watching it, and it was the episode of the show where Ash's Bulbasaur is about to evolve. And in the show, for Bulbasaur to evolve, it's not just leveling up. They have to go to this special ritual where all these Bulbasaur gather, and they evolve into Ivysaur in the sight of this great, massive Venusaur, essentially.
Look, you guys, it's a Venusaur!
And Ash's Bulbasaur is too stubborn to evolve, and so it kind of stays in its form. If you've seen the show, you know what episode I'm talking about. That was my first episode of Pokemon that I watched. The original series often had these esoteric, strange episodes like this, where the Pokemon weren't merely leveling up or battling, they were existing in this ecosystem that had this unknowable lore. And Ash and company were just stumbling upon this lore. It felt so genuinely exciting to brush up against this fascinating, unusual idea. But revisiting the anime, it can be a little rough sometimes. Look, Pokemon is incredibly nostalgic, especially to 90s kids, but it's clearly designed to be for younger audiences. It was not made with longevity in mind, especially not at the beginning. Well, let me rephrase that. It was made with longevity in mind, the longevity of continually making money. The show was always focused on its consistent audience, that being kids. Therefore, the show wasn't allowed to grow with its audience. It had to remain stagnant in order to appeal to an ever-shifting demographic. That sounds a little contradictory, but it makes sense. You know, if your target demographic is 10-year-olds, you gotta aim for the 10-year-olds, and that means your audience will age out and a new audience will age in, but the core appeal will remain the same.
In my opinion, parents should not let their kids watch Pokemon, play Pokemon, buy Pokemon cards, have anything whatsoever to do with Pokemon, because the message is violence.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
But the problem is, unlike a lot of other pieces of media in the 90s and 2000s, such as, say, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, Naruto, Bleach, One Piece, Pokemon was not allowed to age and mature with its audience. Hell, Pokemon's biggest competition, Digimon, was the show that really did that. The characters grew up. From season to season, new casts of characters came in, and the old cast of characters were able to mature into new roles. So, the problem was, Pokemon never saw that. Every new arc saw Ash find a bunch of new companions and go to a new region. At the end of Johto, we saw the cycle really start to pick up. Johto's end is where Ash left Misty and Brock, and went on to Hoenn. We met May, Max, and reunited with Brock, but the cycle continued, and that was the formula for a very long time. Rinse and repeat. Ash would almost win the Pokemon League after getting all the badges, go to a new region, make new friends, rinse and repeat, until just recently, where Ash was finally allowed to win, and a new cast of characters took over, 2 decades after Ash's journey began. But what if Pokemon were written a little differently? What if Ash's journey was allowed to end, and end at the right time? This is an entirely speculative approach on how I would redraft the plot of the original Pokemon anime if I had creative control over a piece of media made when I was a kid. So, I'm in no way saying Pokemon needs to be fixed or improved, because if I did say that, I wouldn't be really want to talk about it all that much, would I? Pokemon obviously did the right thing at the right time. This is entirely not, I could do Pokemon better than the Pokemon Company can. No, not that at all. I'm saying, hypothetically, if Pokemon were a show with a definite beginning, middle, and end, how would that middle, beginning, and end look? And the point of the show is not to go episode by episode and draft out in detail every single plot of Pokemon. No. These are just a few creative alterations I'd make if I were to have complete creative control over Pokemon's first 5 seasons. That is, the start of Kanto to the end of the Johto League at the Silver Conference. You are all free to tell me that this is terrible and bad and dumb, which it probably will be, because everyone's going to have a different idea of what should be improved and what shouldn't be improved. I'm sure half of you want to make Pokemon into like a dark, edgy Hellsing-esque story, but I'm trying to keep the demographic logical, growing with the audience as they grow up. This is entirely for fun. Don't take this too seriously. And no, this isn't just going to be turn the Pokemon anime into Pokemon Adventures, which itself is a great manga, but it's a different entity. So let's start with a few key things. What are some things that really work about the original anime, and what doesn't really work about the original 5 seasons of Pokemon? Well, the first thing is this. The characters are all great and iconic, for a good reason. All of the original characters of Pokemon are iconic and beloved for a reason. While Ash may have a flatter arc than most protagonists in anime, he's still a great figure that kids can identify with. Same with Misty and Brock.
Team Rocket! Why don't you just pretend you're a tree and leave?
Ooh, funny. Who told you that one, Professor Oak?
Team Rocket is iconic and undeniably scene stealers in every episode they're in.
Even Team Rocket could win if they fought like that.
Hurry, take notes.
These 6 core characters, counting Meowth, are firmly established and should not change all that much, especially early on. The deviations we take with the plot overall will skew their arcs in different directions, but that become more drastic the further into Johto we go. Another great thing about the show is the sense of exploration and adventure. There are several filler episodes that expand the world in ways that are interesting. For example, in Johto, we meet a character named Casey, who loves a baseball team called the Electabuzz, named after... well, it's pretty obvious what it's named after.
Don't the Electabuzz always finish in last place?
You quit saying bad things about the Electabuzz. They're gonna beat everybody.
The Electabuzz couldn't beat an egg.
But yeah, Pokemon baseball teams, that's some cool stuff that really enriches the world and really wouldn't come up organically in Ash's adventure, unless he happens to stumble upon a baseball game. So stuff like that, very simple. There's that one episode where they encounter these ancient giant Pokemon using these old ancient capturing devices, I guess you can say. Not really Pokeballs, more like eldritch seals. It's wild and crazy and never appears elsewhere, but it's just a fun little detail that enriches the world. Pokemon being front and center, I love it. That's gotta stay. But there are things that sometimes are disappointing. Now, I mentioned before the characters are great, and that is true, but we encounter a ton of characters and never really follow up on any of them. Some episodes and events feel like they exist in isolation, but seldom are relevant after they occur, even if they seem major. I loved how after the Indigo League, we did come back to that Spearow who Ash encountered in the first episode. We see past events return. That's neat, and this rewrite's going to see a lot of that. A lot of characters who did appear in the past coming back with more relevance. There are also entire plot points that feel like nothing burgers in the show. Like, what's the point of the GS Bowl, right? I know there are plans for Celebi to come out of it, but like, we don't see how that comes into play at all. And it's built up over the course of multiple seasons. Really, 2 whole seasons are spent trying to open this thing, and it never culminates. It's disappointing and underwhelming. And further, the movies, they feel incredibly disconnected from the anime. The first movie has build-up episodes leading into it, but aside from Mewtwo Returns as a special, we never see the first movie amount to anything after the fact. And the other movies have even less build-up, or less ties, or fewer references at that.
It seems like it happened only yesterday.
But the biggest issue I have is the lack of growth that we see. There's a joke that Ash is eternally 10 years old, even though we know, canonically, that the Indigo League takes place over the course of a year. By the time Ash loses to Richie, a year passed since he left Pallet Town. But yeah, it's disappointing how we never really see Ash's world through maturing eyes. His sense of responsibility never changes, and he doesn't seem to grow from season to season. Until we get to the end of the arc, we see how he has grown, but we also know that growth is going to be reset when he leaves for the next region. With this rewrite, that will no longer be the case. Every region will have an impact on Ash's growth as a character. But just as importantly, Ash's friends will also need to grow and mature. Outside of Gary, most of Ash's friends and companions and rivals don't seem to grow in those first 5 arcs of Pokemon, those first 5 seasons of Pokemon. So we want to do that. We want to change it so we see a real sense of growth from start to finish.
I don't believe it could be just a coincidence that I met you out of all people.
Many of these rewrites I discussed with members of my Discord. If you want to join my Discord, you're more than welcome to. This community is only accessible at this time to Patreon members and YouTube members. So if you haven't already become a member on Patreon or on YouTube, now's the time. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this video so YouTube, as an algorithm, knows that you like weird esoteric stuff like this, because this is a very strange topic. It's basically the equivalent of a video essay fanfiction, but let's go with it.
I'm back!
Haven't you learned your lesson yet?
Let's start with our rewrite. There are a few big things I'd like to try to do with this rewrite. First, I'd like to reduce the sheer numbers who appear, but I also want to make it so the characters who do appear show up more often. It would not be an exaggeration to say that thousands of characters appear in the Kanto arc alone. And then there's the Orange Islands and the Johto and the anime. So 90% of the characters who show up in Kanto do not show up again after their debut episode. The Samurai, Damien, nothing. Bruno, one of the major members of the Elite Four in 2 regions, does not reappear after his debut in episode 71 of the anime.
Is there a reason you're following me?
Well, you see...
And the characters who do reappear don't reappear for long stretches of time. Take Duplica, you know, the Ditto trainer. She shows up in episode 37 of the anime. Her next, and to date last appearance, episode 174, deep into Johto. That's ridiculous. That's a long stretch of time for this character to show up again. Most audience members probably forgot she even existed. That's not okay. That's not right, in my opinion. Characters like this should appear more frequently and wherever relevant, even if in small little cameos. The other big idea I have is to enhance the idea of thematic completion. So obviously the original anime was written season by season, episode by episode, and with several ideas being proposed before being dropped. The original trailer for the first Pokemon movie, for example, teases a very different plot than the one we got, with a heavy focus being placed on a confrontation between Team Rocket, including Giovanni, and Mewtwo, as well as an enigmatic girl who may or may not be Ash and Misty's daughter. Though it should be noted that in 2019, it was revealed by Kunihiko Yuyama at Anime Expo that the ladies in the trailer, they were just illustrated for the trailer and aren't actually Misty and her future daughter. I think this is kind of lame. I think it should be the daughter, but, you know, I didn't write the show. But we might in this rewrite. So let's actually start with Indigo. The Indigo League is one of the tighter arcs in Pokemon, only serving for 1 season and lasting about 80-something episodes. It serves as a fantastic introduction to the world of Pokemon, but there are a few things we can revise. The first change I'd like to make is to gym fights. Now famously, Ash kind of cheeses his way to victory, with Ash's first 2 badges basically being given to him out of pity by Brock and Misty's sisters. I don't think Ash legitimately wins a gym badge until he fights Lieutenant Surge, and even then, he doesn't really earn another badge until Koga and Blaine. In this rewrite, Ash should beat Brock and Misty in a fight, but I think in both cases he should be either losing or completely lose first. I think a lesson he should learn in the first fight with Brock is that he can't overly rely on Pikachu, because up until this point in the show, he's kind of used Pikachu as like his chief enforcer, his main guy, but we haven't seen enough of Ash learn to depend on his other Pokemon yet. In the original anime, he throws Pikachu right at Onix, and that goes as well as you expect. I think he should lose to Brock in the same fashion as before, but in the follow-up fight, figure out a way to use another Pokemon to emerge victorious. Maybe Butterfree. Maybe using Sleep Powder or something like that, or something clever. Now, Brock wants to be a Pokemon breeder, so Ash's empathy towards his Pokemon, especially seeing the pain Pikachu goes through in the first place, should be what earns the respect of Brock. Because in the original anime, it's almost like out of pity that Brock goes with Ash. This way, we see that Brock recognizes Ash as a person who is deeply empathetic towards his Pokemon, and not just a dumb kid who throws everything at Onix. You know, I keep doing the same routine over and over again to the detriment of his own Pokemon.
I want to play this
this match to the end!
There's no point in going on. I really don't want to hurt your Pokémon.
However, alternatively, we could see Ash figure out a way to use Pikachu's physical moves as opposed to his electric moves, perhaps using tackles or tail whips to weaken Geodude and Onix in some capacity. Either way, we would see that Ash is learning to work outside the box, and that would earn Brock's respect more than simply Ash throwing another Thunderbolt at Onix again, or overcharging his Pikachu to the point where it bursts with energy. That also said, I think we should still have Flint show up to give Ash like a prep talk for Brock, but like, and give him information on type weaknesses and stuff like that, but I don't think we need to do anything too drastic there. Just change up the types, have Ash win legitimately and fairly. Now, as for Misty, by this point, Ash would have met Misty because first episode they meet. This episode should have the same core concept, same flow. Misty's sisters almost give Ash the badge just by default. Misty comes in to challenge Ash, they fight. Big difference, Team Rocket shouldn't interrupt. Let Misty and Ash's battle play out to its natural conclusion. Make it a close fight, motivating Misty to improve as a trainer before she can be a gym leader to surpass her sisters. Now, what's interesting is in the anime, there are several points where Ash and Misty do fight. For example, in Johto, they fight over a Totodile. There's the Whirl Islands tournament where they confront each other. There's the race in the 5th Pokemon movie where they confront each other. By setting up a pseudo-rivalry between Ash and Misty, this allows for some more of a dynamic connection between the two characters. I think having a more friendly rivalry between Ash and Misty also leads into the whole shipping aspect of it as well, which you're going to see this, I'm very biased. I think Ash and Misty should have ended up together. I don't know what to tell you. Listen, I mean, I know you all have your May shippers and all that, you're great, but like, I mean, anyway, we'll get to that later. That's a bridge we'll cross much later down the road, but just know that's my end game here. Get angry in the comments right now if you disagree. I get it. Pokemon has a long history, and every single kid who grew up with it has that. The ship they grew up with as the above everything else. It's fine. I get it. That's the internet. What are you going to do? Now, we'll get to Misty and Brock's arcs over the course of this rewrite later, but for right now, gym battles, make them conclusive. Now let's get to Erica and Sabrina. Both fights are ones that Ash wins, quote-unquote, through good deeds, and not really talent as a trainer. Erica, I feel, is more flexible, but Ash should still beat Erica in a fight. We should really see Erica as a challenge to Ash. Like, I think Ash's Charmander can give him an edge at first, but Erica does something clever, like puts Charmander to sleep, maybe poison powders him and knocks him out, and so now Ash is without his trump card against a grass type, and that would make him think more creatively outside the box. Something clever like that would be fun. As for Sabrina, let Ash use Haunter in a fight. I think that 3-part arc with Sabrina is fantastic. Some of the best in Kanto. So I don't have too many complaints with that arc. It's great, but let's actually have Ash face Sabrina with Haunter. And keep Haunter, because Haunter is a cool Pokemon, okay? I'm biased, I love ghost types, but let Ash hold on to Haunter. Because quite frankly, the Sabrina fight is great and incredible and needs so few notes, but just keep Haunter. Also, Ash shouldn't give away all his Pokemon. Like, I know some have to go, like Butterfree's gotta go, Pidgeot, that'd be a good idea to have him sacrifice Pidgeot as well, given the context, but let's not have Ash just give away every single Pokemon. And of course, Charizard later on, he's got to go train. That's different. Koga and Blaine, I feel, play out fine. But as for Viridian City, well, that can also play out the same way. We'll get to Giovanni later. I think this rewrite really does the most with Giovanni's character, not just in Kanto, but in all the arcs to follow. But we set the groundwork here. Now, in regards to the rotating cast of characters, I think we can narrow down some of the reoccurring filler characters down a bit. But they have to show up back throughout the season, potentially even reappearing in the Indigo League. I looked up a list of the characters that show up in the Indigo League, and I went to find which ones are the most interesting. The ones with the most potential to grow. In my opinion, ignoring characters associated with specific gym leaders. The Samurai, who Ash has his Metapod battle with. AJ, the guy who tries opening his own Pokemon gym with a Sandshrew. Damien, the guy who abandons his Charmander to die. Brutella and Nastina, the Beach episode sisters. Duplica, the Ditto trainer. Mikey and the Eevee brothers. Jezebel, James's fiance. Todd Snap and Richie have the most potential to grow over the course of the series, especially if they're reoccurring characters and can be reincorporated into episodes really smoothly. Even episodes that already exist, you can easily slot them in as, oh hey, haven't seen you in a while, and then they help out with the resolution of the filler episode, just to demonstrate how they've grown. In particular, I think Todd Snap and Richie have potential so significant that I'll highlight them in particular as we go on. That is not to say that characters I didn't mention should just disappear outright. There's a lot of good filler episodes, and they have good characters. I really love the Ghost of Maiden's Peak, who is actually Ghastly, and Tommy, that boy who's raised by Kangaskhan's. I wouldn't want to get rid of them. But other characters, we could drop them and not lose too much. That said, the Porygon episode and the Dratini episode where Ash gets a gun pulled on him, those stay in. We just take out the seizure stuff and we're fine. We're good. Excellent stuff all around. No changes to the Dratini episode, by the way. That's perfectly fine as it is. I'm surprised the Dratini episode was banned in America of all places, but I digress. Well, actually, it was right after Columbine, so actually that does make a lot of sense when I think about it. Okay, moving on. Now, this next change I'm going to suggest is controversial, and I get if I lose you with this one. Jesse, James, and Meowth should not be in every single episode. Some episodes of the original anime clearly squeeze Team Rocket into the formula in ways that doesn't make a lot of sense and actually throws off the flow of the episode. Now listen, I love these dorks. They are my favorite characters in the show, by a mile. But I think the show would benefit more if we have a rotating cast of adversaries that Ash faces off against, some more serious than others. And Team Rocket, as much as I love them, we can cut them out of a few episodes. Not all of them, but a number of them. For one, I think Gary should be an actual rival, and not just a distant gloating figure. Gary and Ash don't actually fight each other until right before Johto in the original anime, and that's not good. Wrong, in fact. Bring Gary in way sooner as someone Ash actually loses to, who drives Ash to be better. And that's the other thing, too, because Gary's not the only trainer from Pallet Town who left the same day as Ash. They were 3, and all of them got to Professor Oak before Ash woke up. Who are they? That's the other change. Make them characters. Not just make them characters we encounter on a regular basis. Not just in this season, but in the future as well. And let's just start off with this. One of them should be Green, the female trainer who holds a bit of an elusive role on the periphery. This is the biggest thing I'm going to lift from the Pokemon Adventures manga. Let's just call her Leaf, for the sake of avoiding confusion. Leaf should be tied up in hijinks involving Team Rocket's criminal organization. Not just Jesse and James, but like the hierarchy. Almost like a Faye Valentine or Ada Wong kind of role. Whenever Ash and company deal with the main body of Team Rocket, such as Cassidy and Butch, Leaf should be in over her head somewhere, getting tangled up with it. I think this avoids making Leaf just another Gary, but also makes her dynamic in her own way, and further ties Ash in with the bigger bads of the show. I don't think she ever makes it to the Pokemon League, but she'll play a role into Johto, and I think that will make her distinct and interesting. The third trainer who leaves Pallet Town, I feel, should be Richie.
Congratulations, Richie. Huh? Thanks, Ash.
Richie only appears at the end of the Indigo League as the guy who beats Ash, Ash's direct counterpart. But I think it would be interesting if Richie occupied almost a Wally-esque role at first. Someone who looked up to Ash and gradually becomes more Ash-like. But, and here's where things get interesting, he also represents what Ash could be if he just knew more about Pokemon. He's enthusiastic about research, and I think Richie should ultimately win the Indigo League, beating out Ash, but demonstrating what Ash, and indeed Gary even, could be if they gained knowledge about Pokemon and worked hard. The ambition drives Richie to be something great. In this sense, in this rewrite, Richie starts off as a Wally character who just appears and kind of seems vulnerable at first, but soon becomes more like Red from the games. And after winning, he should do some studies in Mount Silver, something that I think could really lead to a powerful finale for this whole thing. But we'll get to that way later. For right now, Richie starts off weak, learns something, becomes greater than Ash and Gary. And that should be his arc, and that should motivate everyone to improve as a result. And this makes sense. We know Gary chooses Squirtle as his starter. Leaf would choose Bulbasaur, and Richie has a Charmander, so he can choose Charmander. But the one difference, Richie should evolve his Charmander into a Charizard, because then the arc that Ash's Charizard takes in the Indigo League will be more interesting. Famously, Ash's Charizard refuses to listen to Ash until the trainer demonstrates his love for Charizard during the Orange Islands, where Charizard's frozen solid. I think it'd be far more interesting if Charizard stopped listening to Ash because Ash got Charizard hurt in an extreme fight as a newly evolved Charmeleon.
Its trainer needs experience. If the trainer is poor, the Pokemon won't respect him and won't obey orders.
The specific circumstances aren't important. You could probably slot him into any of these arcs. Maybe the Aerodactyl arc, where Charmeleon evolves in the first place. But Ash, overconfident with Charmeleon's new form, could pit the Pokemon against a really powerful Pokemon and almost get Charmeleon killed, if not really injured. And while Ash is horrified and guilt-ridden, this puts a rift between him and his Pokemon, one that is slowly repaired as Ash wins badges and proves he's growing to Charmeleon and later Charizard's sense of value, to be worthy of his power.
If the trainer is poor, the Pokemon won't respect him and won't obey orders.
Well, the Blaine fight could be a great turning point in the Charizard-Ash relationship. I think fighting Richie with a perfectly trained Charizard might illustrate to both Ash and Charizard the mistakes both of them made over the course of this journey, which would lead Ash and his Charizard losing fair and square to Richie, outgunned by a better trainer. And this would be more satisfying, I feel, than just having Ash lose because Charizard doesn't want to fight a Pikachu.
It may have thought Charmander, a flame type like itself, was a worthy adversary, but it doesn't want to bother battling with a puny little Pikachu.
Like, that's underwhelming and frustrating for the audience, and I don't like it. And I never liked it, and I want to change that because I'm rewriting it myself, and this is what I want to do. So we're doing it. That's the terms I'm setting for myself. The other big change is Team Rocket, who I think should play more of a critical role in the narrative. Team Rocket being the criminal organization, not merely Jesse, James, and Meowth. We should see Team Rocket do terrible things. While the Pokemon Tower arc is more tied in with Sabrina in the anime, I do think we should see a storyline focusing on Team Rocket taking command of the Silph building in Saffron City. And I think it's best if we see this happen after meeting Cassidy and Butch, firmly illustrating that Jesse and James are not typical of Team Rocket, that the organization is truly a threat where things get serious.
Jesse, Butch and I have been talking to the boss, and he's been very unhappy that you haven't brought him any Pokemon.
Even the Island of Giant Pokemon, where there's all those big Pokemon animatronics, that should be a little more insidious, teasing something is evil in the outskirts of the Pokemon world. I think that at Silph, Ash should encounter Giovanni directly, and Ash, Misty, and Brock should 1v1 Giovanni, and all lose. It's only thanks to Leaf that they would escape at all, but Team Rocket should get away with what they want. Technology meant to control Mewtwo. Technology they used to build Mewtwo's armor that you see later on in the show. See, the other thing I think we should do here is be building to the events of each movies way earlier and way more effectively. We should make sure that each film feels like the culmination of some theme or idea from each season. In this case, Giovanni controlling Mewtwo should have ramifications we see in the world, where we see places disrupted by Mewtwo, which further builds the threat level. We as the audience might be the only ones aware that Mewtwo's gone through somewhere, but the characters should feel the effects. If Mewtwo, let's say, captures a bunch of Pokemon for Team Rocket all at once, there should just be areas of Kanto that are just depopulated or empty, or trees that are just ravaged, or a mountain that's crumbling. Something to show something all-powerful was here. Giovanni could be using Mewtwo to enact raids or heists, something. Perhaps this is even how we encounter the ghosts of the Marek Mother. Maybe Mewtwo's wreckage destroys a Marek Mother. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. I think Mewtwo's wreckage should give Jesse and James cold feet about their actions, illustrating how these guys, at their core, are still good people caught in a criminal enterprise. Also, let's show in the show how Jesse's mom disappeared hunting Mew for Team Rocket. That's a part of extra canon that was kind of outside the anime, and I feel never really got explored sufficiently enough. Let's explore that. It's a cool concept with a lot of tragic ramifications. Also, on the James side of things, Jezebel should pursue James throughout the Orange Islands and into Johto. Just randomly show up, just trying to get James to marry her. Also, you might notice I haven't mentioned Meowth a lot so far, or Pikachu. That's because they're both perfect, and I don't have any recommendations for them at this moment, outside of maybe how they function in relation to the group that they're both in, because, again, Meowth and Pikachu are both perfect and need no notes.
Don't forget, we haven't even succeeded in capturing that one little Pikachu from those kids. We have a proud tradition of failure to uphold.
Now, the final change I'll make before you switch gears to the Orange Islands is to incorporate the Elite Four firmly as figures to confront. The problem is, the idea of Ash becoming a Pokemon Master is a nebulous thing. Pokemon Master, what does that mean? How do you, is that a position? Is that a job? Is that a rank, like a black belt in karate? What is that? How do you define a Pokemon Master? We need something concrete, something tangible Ash can achieve to reach his goal. We need specific trainers he can fight and beat in order to be a champion, as it is in the games. When Richie beats Ash, he should be able to go off and face the Elite Four after the Indigo League. But before going to Mount Silver, because we should at least know about Lance, Agatha, Bruno, and Lorelei. I mean, Bruno we meet in the show proper, but he's kind of like made into a joke character. We see the legend of Bruno outpaces the reality. That shouldn't be the case. Bruno's power should be unmatchable. There should be a clear gulf between everything Ash has faced directly so far and Bruno in the show. Maybe Bruno himself can get hit by a rock, sure, but Bruno's Pokemon should be mountain-breaking figures. But what about the rest? One of the easiest ones to invite for, especially at this point, is Agatha. Agatha should have some direct connection to Professor Oak. Perhaps an ex-lover or a rival or a friend of his. Professor Oak, I feel, especially in the first arc, doesn't really have a lot of dimension, outside of being a mentor figure, a little silly, sometimes overwhelmed by circumstances, and much later on, he's time travels with Celebi. Giving him a rival as a teenager would be good, and especially if this rivalry continues into adulthood. Also, let's make it more explicit that Delia Ketchum worked with Professor Oak at some point in the past, and more importantly, that Professor Oak gave Ash's father his first Pokemon. Ash's dad doesn't play a role in the original anime. Beyond vague references, they took like 10 days to get to Viridian City or whatever.
It took your father 4 days to get there when he started Pokemon training. Oh, he'll be so proud.
Ash's dad won't play a role at all in this season beyond vague references and maybe some disappointment. Maybe some of Delia Ketchum's pain at raising Ash alone. Something that the adults in the room could get, but the kids would go over their heads. Something vague like that. Think more Bluey in terms of maturity, where it's a kid can watch it and still enjoy it, but like the parents in the room, they get what you're throwing at them. But we shouldn't be overpowered with mentions of Ash's dad, because he's not really relevant at this point in the game. Even in this rewrite, he's not totally relevant yet. But I think if you're picking up what I'm putting down, you know he's going to be relevant later on. We'll get to that. Don't worry, it's coming. We'll just hold your horses. We'll get there way later in the video. There's a lot of video. I mean, look at the runtime. You're going to be here for a while. If you watch this far, you're probably in the long term right now. We're going to break it up into a couple days of watching it. Strap in. Just don't forget Ash's dad. He'll come into play later on. Anyway, the Elite Four. Right. I got sidetracked again. I do that sometimes. Lorelei. I feel Lorelei should have ties with Misty and her family in some way. Perhaps when Misty's sisters show up again during that mermaid performance later on in Kanto, they have Lorelei as a special guest who draws in a massive audience. We can kind of see maybe Lorelei inspire Misty in some way, and that might give Ash pause. Agatha can show up in that one episode where they dig up those ancient giant Pokemon, while Lorelei maybe can also show up when they're going to Cinnabar or return from Cinnabar. Lance, though, we're going to not see Lance. We're going to be talking about Lance. People will mention Lance, but Lance as a figure will not appear until much later. Again, because we know we're pacing the show out. Build-up is important with this show, I think, with the rewrites. Build up the big characters. We know in hindsight who the big characters are because, again, we watch the show, we know what's going on, yada, yada, yada. But Lance is a gigantic figure, the head of the Elite Four. Let's hold off on seeing him, but let's not hold off on hearing about him. And as I mentioned before, at the very start of this thing, when a year passes in Kanto, Ash actually ages a year. Each region should take 1 year, so by the time the Johto arc ends, Ash is 13 years old. This is important. The biggest missed opportunity with the Pokemon anime is to over-rely on Ash being a perpetual, ageless child. We need to have him mature. We need to have him age up into a new role as time passes. Again, like what Digimon does. I really like what they do with that, where the characters can go to college and become adults.
What are these things?
They're nothing. They're not mine. I'm just holding them for a friend.
That process begins in this rewrite by letting Ash age past being 10. And I mean, even in the original anime, Ash ages a year in Kanto. So let's just not ignore that and say Ash is 10 years old 15 years later in real time. There shouldn't be 15 seasons passing where Ash is still 10. There's too many episodes for Ash to still be 10. There are more episodes than days in the year. There are more episodes than the days in the year of like 4 or 5 years, and he's still 10? Like, you kidding me? No. Ash is going to grow up. That's a hard line in the sand I'm drawing here. And with that, that's all the big changes I have for the Indigo League, because moving into the Orange Islands and moving into Johto, we're going to get a lot more drastic, and we're going to get a lot more crazy with this. So, let's keep going. It's a lovely close-up, I'm sure. Shifting gears to the Orange Islands, this arc is fairly short and self-contained, but I think there's some ripe opportunity to evolve certain ideas that come into play later. One great part of the Orange Islands is how the island's unique features impact Pokemon evolution. Brock, as a potential breeder, should be motivated to stay with Professor Ivy in order to study the unique breeding on the island. This experience should shape and develop his arc, and he should reappear throughout the Orange Islands as a guest character to kind of illustrate A, the specific evolution going on in each island, and B, his growth as a character. That way, when he rejoins the team in Johto, he comes with a newfound experience that could help the team later on. Also, I think it's just better this way, because in the original anime, Brock leaves to be with Professor Ivy because he thinks she's hot, which, valid, she is.
Pleased to meet you. I'm Professor Ivy.
But they never explain why exactly he returns to the group, other than that, hey, something happened between him and Ivy. Now, however, if we have his motivation be he's there to study the breeding on the islands, he has a reason to stay, and he also has a reason built in to return home, because he's finished his studies, he's examined them enough, and he's ready to rejoin his friends. But of course, the reason why the party goes to the Orange Islands in the first place is secondary to that. They go to meet Professor Ivy in order to learn about the GS Ball. The GS Ball is this item, a real MacGuffin in Pokemon, that, especially the early seasons, that has no real execution on the idea. It just sort of appears, and there's no payoff. If we're rewriting the Orange Islands, that payoff should become clear, and it should be very, very relevant.
It's exactly the same thing with you and Ash.
You must be crazy!
Now this leaves Tracy, who I personally think should be replaced with Todd Snap. Yeah, Todd. Remember him? He showed up for a few episodes in Kanto, and he culminates in the encounter with Butch and Cassidy. Todd should replace Tracy, because they're very similar in a lot of ways. Tracy's whole objective is to illustrate Pokemon, right? Todd's motivation is to take photos of said Pokemon. They both have the same function. They want to capture Pokemon in their natural habitats. But Todd's a familiar character. He's someone we've grown to know. And yes, I am just saying this because I want to have more Pokemon Snap references in this anime, and I'm biased because I love Pokemon Snap, but come on.
Welcome back.
Plus, Tracy's boring. Who cares? You can replace him with cardboard and no one would notice, alright? Like, look, Tracy always felt a little bit superfluous in the Orange Islands, but with Todd, there might be motivation. Todd's whole thing is he wants to take photos of rare and unusual Pokemon. Well, what if Ash and company bump into Todd in the Orange Islands early on? Todd is on the Orange Islands to search for a mysterious Pokemon that has been sighted in the area, one that myths and legends tell about. A legendary bird Pokemon named Lugia. One thing on the Orange Islands that I think was so interesting was it introduced all these variants and alternate Pokemon long before they appeared elsewhere, long before shiny Pokemon appeared in the games, long before the Alola variant forms. So there's stuff like The Pudgy Pidgey Isle, which I think is very self-explanatory. The Crystal Onyx. These are all examples of variant Pokemon who are impacted by their environments in one way or another. And if I had complete control over this arc, the one thing I would do, first and foremost, go even further with this. The Orange Islands has the potential for so many really interesting, standout creative possibilities. Perhaps as a Tangela that's overgrown and merged with the forest. Maybe a Cubone, where it's not the skull of its mother, but the fossilized skull of an Aerodactyl. Something unique and creative. Oh, and none of these variants can be Alola variants at all, just because Alola didn't exist. We can't draw from stuff that didn't exist at this time. So we gotta come up with original ideas, creative ones, unusual ones that won't make sense in the games whatsoever. They're just cool. Now, I think that the episodes should showcase minor characters from the prior season coming back, even if all we're doing is just seeing how they've grown since interacting with Ash and company, or since the Indigo League. We should see what AJ is up to. We should maybe catch up with Blaine or one of the Kanto gym leaders. Misty's sisters can come back, maybe to train with their water Pokemon, or put on a show in a new venue. Honestly, personally, I would love to see Sabrina just show up at a beach, and because it's just so funny. The idea of Sabrina, this very socially awkward, very powerful psychic woman, kind of awkwardly shuffling around a beach looking to have fun, but doesn't know what they're doing. It has the potential for some really awkward comedy, and I'm all about that. Plus, I love Sabrina, and any chance you get more of Sabrina, I am always for. The Orange Islands can also be a really great time to bring over an interesting plot point that was introduced later on in the anime. Past Johto even. Misty's fear of Gyarados.
But Gyarados is another story.
I think Misty should capture a Gyarados while traveling on the Orange Islands to kind of ride alongside the Lapras Ash has. Now, Misty's fear is settled in one episode of the Pokemon anime after she leaves Ash and company, but I think having that over the course of the Orange Islands would be a really interesting mechanic of the story, and give Misty an extremely powerful Pokemon aside from her Psyduck. One notable element of the Orange Islands is its length. It's far, far shorter than any other season of anime, and thus leaves us with a lot less wiggle room. But what's good is the core of these episodes doesn't really need much changing. It's all pretty solid. Especially the episode where Ash gets jealous of Misty when that one guy starts hitting on her. I love that. And the guy realizes Misty cares more about Ash anyway. It's stuff like that I just adore. In case you couldn't tell, big Poke shipper. I love that stuff. Any shipping potential between Ash and Misty during the Orange Islands? Yes. Pump it into my veins. Anyway, so last time we mentioned Giovanni as the big bad of the Kanto arc. Well, in Orange Islands, the bad guy's still Giovanni. It's Team Rocket. But with such a shorter story, there's less room for complicated adversaries. Gary's off doing his own thing, his self-discovery thing. Richie, in this rewrite, is off to face the Elite Four. So all we have left for adversaries is Team Rocket, which means Leaf, our new rival, will also travel to the Orange Islands in a minor role to uncover Team Rocket's plots and try to undermine them. There might be a couple fun episodes we can add where what's going on is a front for Team Rocket in some way. There's already a Butch Cassidy episode in Orange Islands we can use for that. So what is Team Rocket doing in the Orange Islands Now remake? Well, one component of this rewrite is the idea that the movies matter. The movies impact the plot. And well, we'd have to make sure that Mewtwo's counterattack in the first season, it didn't just blow up Giovanni's estate. It obliterated the center of the command for Team Rocket. We'd probably cut back to Jesse and James, and they haven't heard back from Giovanni in some time. Maybe they're wondering what's going on and what's happening, but then they'd be approached by Cassidy and Butch to join a secret operation in the Orange Islands, and they'd be hunting for information regarding the 3 legendary birds, Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno, because Giovanni has his sights set on a Pokemon that could rival Mewtwo's power in order to subdue the legendary Pokemon and bring him back under his wing. See, the problem with most of the original 5 Pokemon movies is that they have fairly weak antagonists. Ignoring movies 1 and 3, The central human threat is often a very flat, very boring character. Lawrence III in Pokemon 2000 especially is a boring character. His motivation for capturing the legendary birds in Lugia, it's because he wants to complete his collection. That's kind of lame, I'm not gonna lie. Kind of underwhelming for all the massive technology and the expensive stuff he uses to get that goal accomplished. But what if instead of Lawrence III, the bad guy of Pokemon 2000 was Giovanni? The folklore regarding Lugia and the three birds can stay the same. In fact, I think it should reach beyond the film. These 4 islands are built up throughout the whole series now, making it a major site of importance, that legends deal with the birds passing through. Maybe some of the island people believe that the conditions on the Orange Island only exist because of these deified legendary entities. That Zapdos' electricity has caused the soil to change. Articuno's cold ice powers have maybe affected certain islands so that even though they're in the tropics, ice Pokemon flourish here. Moltres potentially lurks in volcanoes, allowing these things to create massive amounts of volcanic soil, thus spurring grass Pokemon. We can see these components sprinkled throughout, how the legendary Pokemon's powers can positively impact the environment, and thus, should something come out of alignment, it can cause a massive catastrophe.
Disturb not the harmony of fire, ice, or lightning.
When we get to Pokemon 2000, Giovanni would capture the birds in much the same way that Lawrence III did in the film, only this time we have a more relevant antagonist who the heroes have faced before. By replacing this big bad, we change a few things. By making the bad guy Giovanni, this makes Jesse and James' decisions to help the protagonist all the more significant. Before, when Jesse and James helped Ash out, it was just to save the world, but now, because they're actively going against Giovanni, it completely upheaves their entire status quo. The trio are now openly rejecting their boss. In this rewrite, it changes everything. They're now quitting in this movie. Over the course of the Orange Islands, we would see them interact with these beautiful, unique species of Pokemon. And this causes them to kind of deviate away from what their Team Rocket's doing. Well, Butch and Cassie would take much more drastic, much more crueler methods to capturing Pokemon. We would see Jesse and James and Meowth kind of push against Butch and Cassie, but that's more of a rivalry. By openly undermining Giovanni in 2000, however, that's their letter of resignation, we'll say.
Lots of people saw what you did out there, and all of them are watching you right now.
Oh, then I guess the bad guys
are finally
good guys.
I also would like it to have more Poke shipping, and because I'm kind of drafting this whole rewrite, there would be more Poke shipping, but nothing too drastic. We're not causing upheaval here, and we still have a lot more show to go through.
And Ash is never really alone because he's got me.
Now, this movie would also be the culmination of Todd's arc, allowing him to take the ultimate photograph of the legendary birds and Lugia together, along with all the other Pokemon that show up. I think Todd at this point should leave the group after this movie, leaving Ash and Misty alone to finish the Orange League Challenge at the season finale, where they can meet back up with Brock and return to Pallet Town as a trio, rather than just bump into Brock randomly in Pallet Town. Brock should show up to see Ash finish his fight, to beat this champion. We can also incorporate Leaf here as the spanner in the works who messes with Team Rocket, giving Ash and friends enough time to pacify the legendary birds. Like Lawrence III in the film, Giovanni can launch one last counterattack on Lugia, which results in the bird obliterating all of Giovanni's machinations, casting the whole of Team Rocket into disarray. Seemingly, Giovanni will be obliterated, but in the end, we should see Giovanni pulling himself out of the rubble and see Ash leaving, holding the GS ball. And that will set Giovanni off on a mission, but as to what that mission will be, we won't see yet. The original anime's Orange League culminated in Ash facing off against Drake, and that doesn't need too many notes. That's a great fight, except for one thing. In the original anime, as the head of the Orange League, Drake is undefeated until he encounters Ash and Pikachu. But in this rewrite, Ash should be the second person to beat Drake. Drake should be undefeated except against Lance of the Elite Four. Lance should be the only other person aside from Ash to have beaten Drake, and this gives Ash a trajectory. in order to become a Pokemon Master, there is still one goal he has to overcome: Lance. Ash now understands that Lance is the person he has to beat, the head of the Elite Four, and that means going to Johto for another chance at confronting the Elite Four like Richie before him has. Now, this change establishes a couple things. For one, Ash now has discernible goals going into Johto. To be a Pokemon Master, he has to defeat Lance. And he also has to defeat Richie, who has gotten to the Elite Four before him. And he also has to open up the GS Ball. And now that he's finished with training on the Orange Islands, he can face Gary once again. Now for another, every other character now has accomplished something important while on the islands. Ash has bested both Team Rocket and the League champion. Misty, by training her Gyarados, has now become a worthy gym leader who has mastered her fears and developed a relationship with Ash. Brock will walk away with vital knowledge on breeding that might help in Johto. Jesse, James, and Meowth have gone from ordinary crooks to heroes. But heroes without direction in their lives. They only have each other now. And Todd, well, he's got his photo, so he's accomplished his goal. He's no longer needed in this plot. He has satisfied his quota, and Tracy does not exist. All around positives. These are good things, I feel. This leads to Johto, where Ash and Gary will have their rematch in Pallet Town, setting the two off for a new, renewed, rekindled rivalry. We will see Gary mature here, again, keeping in line with his original arc in Johto. But in Johto, we will be seeing the most dramatic changes occur in this rewrite, because we have changed so much leading up to Johto. Johto is now no longer simply the next arc in Ash's journey, it is the culmination of the journey thus far. See, there are three core issues I have with Johto as a saga. One is it's repetitive. It's the same arc as Kanto. Ash does the same things. He goes from gym to gym, encounters unique people, etc. There's not really a big innovation in the formula at this point. And for two, it's just so long. It drags out. Johto is the longest arc, comprising of 3 separate seasons. Even though it's still 8 gyms, it's not much more in theory than in Kanto. There needs to be more going on here to justify its length. So we have an opportunity to make things more interesting, less repetitive, and more dynamic. And the first thing is this: Ash's core goals should be the primary focus. Open the GS Ball, beat Gary at the Silver Conference, confront Lance, who Ash understands has ties to Claire, the last gym leader of Johto, and then fight Richie. A simple set of goals, right? Open a ball, beat rival, beat another rival, beat the Elite Four. All goals that we've set up perfectly in the prior 2 seasons. But here's the problem. Ash has beaten 2 whole regions. He's faced all the 8 Kanto gym leaders, and he beat the Orange League. So that makes the Johto League seem a little less intimidating. He's already done this twice. So that's why we're going to take a radical departure from the previous 2 seasons. And it starts with this one key change. Ash is not the only viewpoint character in Johto. The most obvious viewpoint character we can add is Team Rocket, who will be upgraded from regular antagonists to minor protagonists, trying to figure out their place in the world after defecting from Team Rocket. And we've already kind of done this already with Kanto. Even the main anime kind of sometimes has Team Rocket as the protagonists of individual episodes, forcing them into an antagonist role as the plot demands. What this accomplishes is it allows us to take the focus off of Ash in some episodes and focus on entirely different characters. They might even bump into Leaf, who will be returning to subdue the remnants of Team Rocket following the events in Pokemon 2000. The second viewpoint character is just as important, and that will be Jimmy. You don't know Jimmy? Well, have you seen The Legend of Thunder? The Legend of Thunder is a 3-part story from Pokemon Chronicles that, in this rewrite, will take a central focus. Jimmy is the gold stand-in, who appears alongside Marina, who is the crystal equivalent, and Vincent.
Marina is my girlfriend. Well, I mean, at least she's going to be soon.
Huh?
All 3 will be from New Barktown, and in the original series, they end up fighting Team Rocket agents Attila and Hun, who are trying to capture Raikou. In this new rewrite, however, they're promoted to secondary protagonists, who bump into Ash and company when they reach New Barktown. They're about to set off on their journey, and they bump into these old champions coming through to the Johto League. While it would be repetitive to see Ash and Jimmy fight the same gyms over and over again, what we would see instead is Ash and Jimmy undergo parallel arcs in Johto, encountering different sites and sometimes crossing paths when encountering gyms. So Ash might go to a gym, he's walking out, and Jimmy comes in. Or maybe Ash is beaten to a gym by Jimmy and maybe gives Jimmy advice on how to win. This allows us to recontextualize Ash's journey. No longer is he just going on a quest, he also becomes a mentor to Jimmy. All this time up until now, Ash has only had rivals he's looked up to. But in Johto, we should see the opposite. It will allow Ash to really grow as a character, to realize now he has people rising to meet the challenge he represents, and Jimmy should offer Ash a run for his money. Now this is different from with Richie, who we had set up as a Wally-esque character, because Richie and Ash started alongside each other, but Ash has had now 2 years of experience ahead of Jimmy, and these 2 years will allow Ash to have a very specific perspective. It's not simply they grew up together and one looked up to the other. It's now he is the experienced figure who can offer his experience to Jimmy. This will be similar to the relationship Ash has with Go in Pokemon Journeys, which I think is the point where we finally got to see Ash mature as a protagonist in the actual anime. But unlike in that series, Jimmy and Ash will spend enough time apart in order to really develop as individual people. And of course, there will be episodes just centered on Jimmy in this rewrite, where they might encounter different characters, different Pokemon, different locations, unique to Ash. Further, both Jimmy and Team Rocket will have cross encounters with another antagonist, the Silver stand-in named Silver. I know, we're very original in this part of the town. Silver will be much like he is in the original game. He'll steal a Pokemon from Professor Elm, be Jimmy's rival, be the son of Giovanni, estranged and left on his own. Jimmy will undergo an arc similar to his game counterpart. He starts as an edgy, almost dangerous rival, dealing with a lot of pain, before confronting his confused, conflicted inner turmoil, and ultimately grows a person through his rivalries, turning against Team Rocket, who he resents for his tough childhood.
You're leaving? You're running away because you lost to a couple of trainers? What changed? You said you were the strongest in the whole wide world!
You can't move forward if you're unable to accept defeat.
Now, another major change, we continue the first arc's whole thing with an emphasis on reoccurring characters. Characters like Casey, who show up for a few episodes, will now have arcs that intertwine with the story. Maybe they bump into each other at a gym or an event. And these reoccurring characters can bump into different protagonists, offering different perspectives on these established figures. Jimmy bumping into AJ, or any other situation like that. We can bring back old characters time and time again, see how their journeys continue, and bring forth new information and knowledge along the way. Now, this allows the world to be more dynamic, and put characters we're familiar with in different contexts, allowing for fan-favorite characters to keep showing up, and potentially reappearing in the Silver Conference as competitors. A good example of this, I think, for a comparison, when Yu-Gi-Oh! First came out in the Duelist Kingdom arc, we would encounter these different duelists, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Would face them and win. But when Battle City came around, Joey would primarily fight the people Yu-Gi encountered in the Duelist Kingdom, allowing for these established characters to have new, renewed, different contexts for their behavior. I think the Mako arc with Joey was a good example of that. You saw an established character who then fought Joey with the context that he's matured and changed through those 2 arcs. Different dimensions of Mako's character showing up. Again, easy comparison. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! They're contemporaries, really. But that structure, I think, worked for Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that structure will work for Pokemon as well. Now, what about Misty and Brock? Why are they even in Johto? Well, Misty at this point is gearing up to be a full-fledged Kanto gym leader, and will be using her experience to mentor under other gym leaders, taking notes on how they manage their roles successfully or poorly. I think Whitney's a great example for Misty to kind of reprimand a gym leader, because Whitney, as you know in the games, she loses and then runs away and cries. There's a potential there for Misty to maybe be a mentor to an established gym leader. Say, hey, I shouldn't do this, or hey, maybe do this instead. And that allows us to see Misty grow as a character and have interesting interactions with other people. Now, as for Brock, he's shiny hunting. He has found specific elements in Johto that allow certain Pokemon to emerge as shinies. So maybe he's studying these components to figure out why shiny Pokemon materialize, why Pokemon breeding and egg groups, how they work. So, for example, in the original anime, Ash catches a shiny Noctowl. Well, what if that was in an accident. That's Brock hunting for a shiny Noctowl, and that skill set allows them to capture a shiny Noctowl. That would be interesting. That would add some layers of dimension as to why certain things happen the way they do.
There was an incident in Goldenrod City, caused by the remnants of Team Rocket.
Now, along the way, we would also encounter 2 branches of Team Rocket that will serve as antagonists separately throughout Johto. One is led by Giovanni, who is underground, searching for 2 things, the GS Ball and Mewtwo. Now, the second segment is led by Rocket Elites, and this is kind of similar to how in the games there's that splinter group of Team Rocket that's looking for Giovanni. Well, in this rewrite, they're not looking for Giovanni, they're just looking to run things themselves. And this is the group we'll see more primarily. They'll be the ones behind capturing Raikou, capturing Lugia, and ultimately the Red Gyarados. And their motivations are going to be very similar to in the game. They're reestablishing Team Rocket as a new, powerful criminal organization with new leadership in charge. This also means that most of the Team Rocket characters introduced in Johto will be under this new branch. So Attila and Hun, that one weird scientist guy, all of them, they're under new management. And that new management, actually I think the only ones that wouldn't be under this new group would be Domino, who is in Mewtwo Returns, and the Iron Mask Marauder, the villain from Pokemon Forever. Yes, they're both in this rewrite too. We'll get to them later. But who's in charge? Is it going to be one of the game characters? Because there are a lot of game admins we could add in too, which we could just as easily do, but I'm thinking the leaders of this new faction of Team Rocket should instead be someone we're familiar with. Cassidy and Butch. Yeah, in order to show the evolution of every character in this new rewrite, we would make these reoccurring antagonists promoted a little bit. They're now the main threat, because we have to see them grow just as Jesse and James are growing, as a parallel, diverging structure. We saw these guys as grunts, and now they're the top of the class. And that gives us a familiar face for our heroes, including Ash and Misty, including Jesse and James, to confront.
Hey, you're the ones who are in big, big trouble.
And it's coming for you on the double.
Now, one thing you might have noticed is I haven't mentioned a very specific Pokemon this whole time, and that's Ho-Oh. Despite appearing in the first episode of the anime, I haven't discussed Ho-Oh because, frankly, until they reach Ecruteak City, Ho-Oh doesn't really play any role that's different from the original anime. But at that point, the 3 legendary dogs, especially Suicune, would offer a means through which Ash and company can investigate Ho-Oh and learn why Ash saw Ho-Oh in the beginning of his journey. This would also allow characters like Morty to play more of a role outside of just being a gym leader, because Morty is in Ecruteak City. He knows the Burn Tower, he knows the Tin Tower. He can help Ash discover what's going on, along with Eugene, who will again play a role with hunting Suicune, or pursuing Suicune.
It's the bells. This can only mean that the legendary Ho-Oh will soon return. Or the legendary Suicune. You seen?
And Ho-Oh in this context can play a similar role to the dogs that Lugia played with the birds in the Orange Islands. Again, showing how the legendary Pokemon are tied intrinsically with their locations. So the only movie I'm not going to make any recommendations for is Pokemon 3, Spell of the Unknown, because that movie is perfect the way it is. But the 4th and 5th movies we are going to go into and make some changes to, because they're going to serve as major plot points in the Johto Journeys and help lead to the end of Ash's journey at the end of the Johto League. Because again, the core element here, Johto is the end of Ash's journeys. These 3 seasons are a finale. Each of these seasons should have a finale that wraps up a key plot point of Ash's journey. And because we have 3 seasons in Johto, they should all feel like seasons of the show. The first season of Johto will end with Ash and company reaching Azalea Town. Once they get there, they'll hand off the GS ball to Kurt, who tinkers with the ball until the finale of the first Johto season, where the ball opens. Now, throughout the first season, we're going to have Ash have brief encounters with Suicune, similar to how he bumps into Suicune in the original series, but more frequently, kind of in the periphery of his journey. In contrast, Jimmy keeps bumping into Raikou, and Team Rocket, well, they're not seeing anything. Entei would only appear in the 3rd film, Spell of the Unknown. Spell of the Unknown Entei, that's created by the Unknown. That's Molly's dream made manifest. the appearance of this fake Entei will draw the real Entei out. Now, why is it important the three dogs show up? Well, we find out from Kurt there is only one way to open up the GS Ball. We learned that the GS Ball was made in Ekritique City. It was constructed under the sight of Ho-Oh, under the sight of the three dogs. Now, Ash's mission: bring the three dogs together. GS Ball opens up. And after learning this, we see Gary on his own journey. And after some confrontations and after some mishaps, he encounters a molten crater in the ground. And from this crater emerges the legendary beast, Entei. These three characters now tied in with one of the legendary dogs. Now all three are intrinsically tied to the core conflict of this arc. So why are we having Gary with Entei and not Silver? Well, quite frankly, whoever finds the other dogs needs to be more tied with Ash's journey than Jimmy's journey, and Silver is more Jimmy's rival than Ash's. Plus, Gary will end up being tied up with the whole conflict, and thus we tie in this series-long rivalry in a way that's more compelling and interesting. Again, I am lifting from Yu-Gi-Oh! In this one, because with Yu-Gi-Oh!, again, Duelist Kingdom, we have the three main characters in that arc: Yugi, Kaiba, and Merrick, and they all have a legendary god card. I know, I'm lifting from Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot, but trust me, that was a good idea, and we're doing it here too. The second season of Johto will put each of these characters in the path of these dogs more directly. So again, they keep showing up, they keep going back. The characters never capture these dogs, they just kind of bump into them. The Legend of Thunder storyline, for example, that Jimmy first appeared in the original anime, would take place in this second Johto season. And Ash will re-encounter Suicune again, like he does in the original Johto season. But we also see Giovanni emerging in the shadows. And during this season, we'd see the events of Mewtwo Returns, with very few changes, even right down to Mewtwo wiping Giovanni's memory. It'd be a good chance to reunite with Giovanni, see what he's up to, bring Mewtwo back, and show again how the effects of these movies carries throughout this series.
Do not test the limits of my power.
Yeah, I know. New costume. During this time, Jesse, James, and Meowth would remain a spanner in the works, but they'd end up entangled with Silver regardless. He'd probably try for a few episodes to make Jesse and James do his dirty work, but get frustrated by their incompetence. After all, keep in mind, Silver prioritizes strength above all else. This arc would also feature the Whirl Islands tournament, which would give Misty more time to develop as a character, culminating in a rematch between her and Ash in the finale, which would end with Misty beating him. It's important to show that Ash is not the only person growing in this arc. He can't be overconfident. He has to be humbled in some way or another. But also, we should see how Misty is growing alongside Ash, in part because of him, and in part because of her own individual journey. It would be a validating moment for Misty, who can find herself one step closer to becoming a gym leader when she returns home to Cerulean City. And this teases the end of the journey. It's coming. It's nearing. The quest has an end date, and there should be a hint of melancholy knowing that. This season would also build to an episode where Jimmy, Ash, and Gary all connect, and all three dogs who they've been bumping into over the course of this arc follow them. And when they're all brought together, the GS Ball opens up, and out comes a Celebi. This Celebi would get away from Ash and friends and lead into the fourth film, Pokémon Forever. They'll cross paths with Celebi once again, who this time has traveled back to the past and brought a young Professor Oak to the present, as is the case in the original fourth film. However, there are a few key differences, as, I'm sure you've gotten used to hearing at this point. This time, Gary will also play a major role in the story, meeting up with his grandfather as a boy his own age. Of course, as in the original film, no one's going to know it's Professor Oak, but this connection, this sort of dramatic irony, I think will play a major role in the narrative. So the film would feature the Iron Mask Marauder, as we implied before, but not as the big bad. Rather, he'd be more the heavy. He's Giovanni's chief henchman in the film, because Giovanni, once again, is the big bad of the film. In all these films, he's played a role in 3 of them, and I think that's really important. Though Giovanni's intentions here would be to travel back in time in order to prevent Team Rocket from ever falling outside of his grasp, traveling back to the second movie, in theory, or even before that. Now this would require the use of the Dark Ball, which rather than just turn Pokemon evil or whatever it does in the film, it just enslaves a Pokemon to a master's will, kind of like those earworms in Star Trek where they make you suggestible. It breaks their free will in a way that's cruel and unusual. Now, this movie would also feature Silver, who would temporarily join up with his father, who, by the way, we would probably find out in this movie that Silver is Giovanni's son. We, the audience, become aware that all this is a vain attempt for Silver to earn Giovanni's approval, one last chance at validation from his father, something he can clearly never get. Now, the movie's climax would feature Giovanni using Celebi to travel back in time, but Ash and his friends would follow after him, resulting in wild time-warping battles that takes them throughout the various points in the Pokemon history, including the burning of the Burnt Tower, the birth of the legendary dogs, Pokemon wars in the past, the creation of the GS Ball used to contain Celebi's incredible time-traveling power, etc. The movie would end with Ash and friends freeing Celebi from Giovanni's grasp and using the Pokemon's time travel abilities to return to the present, abandoning Giovanni in the far, far distant past. Bit of a dark ending, yes, but we need to wrap up Giovanni's story, and he needs to be beaten, and definitively so. There can't be any coming back from this. He is one of Pokemon's primary antagonists, and he deserves a final defeat, one that there is no coming back from. It's a necessary chapter in his saga. That would put the 4th season of the anime in a neat ending, leading up to the final season for Ash. The 5th season of Pokemon, the last leg of Ash's Master Quest. Now, there is a method to my madness with this structure. The final season of Ash's journey will focus on one thing: legacy. The legacy characters leave behind and what they pursue in the future. This final season, this Master Quest, in order to stand apart, would have to establish this renewed focus on endings and new beginnings, as well as looking to past generations. The season would have to start with the mysterious Pokemon X story. In the original anime, this arc centered on Ash and company reuniting with Richie to stop Team Rocket from stealing a baby Lugia, thus incurring the wrath of its mother. Now, this will probably be mostly the same arc. There's not going to be too many drastic changes, but there are a couple changes by the nature of the beast, of course. That the fact that Team Rocket is now run by Butch and Cassidy and that Giovanni's way in the past. So this is Butch and Cassidy's new Team Rocket faction, now the only Team Rocket faction. That doesn't change too much, though, with this information. What does change is Richie's role. See, we've avoided mentioning Richie up to this point mainly because Richie, in the original anime, remained absent for a long period of time. He showed up in the Indigo League to beat Ash, and then nothing. For multiple seasons, nothing until he reappears with the mysterious Pokemon X storyline. And I don't intend on changing that, but I think it's important to include what Richie's been up to since facing Ash in Kanto, because it informs the theme of legacy. See, there's one thing I really want to change about this arc. In the original anime, it's implied that the adult Lugia that Ash encounters, it's a different Lugia than the one that appeared during the Orange Islands. This, I think, should be made more explicit, because this Lugia should belong to Richie. Yes, Richie has captured a Lugia and has bred it. This needs to be the establishing signs of the division between Ash and Richie. We have seen Ash grow tremendously as a trainer up until this point, accomplishing great things, but Richie should always be Ash's potential if he found a way to transcend his limitations. And what better way to demonstrate this than to reintroduce Richie riding atop the back of a Lugia that he has captured? We have seen multiple times people try to harness the power of legendary Pokemon, only to struggle and fail. The ambition to capture legendaries destroyed Giovanni, but Richie has command of one of the mightiest Pokemon of all time, and he's been training with it in the only place he knows he can match Lugia's great strength, atop Mount Silver. From there, we move on to the Gyarados arc, which will allow us to end the new Team Rocket faction with an explosive finale. In the original anime, this is also where Lance shows up, and I think Lance should show up here as well. Lance should be this great hero, one who is expected to topple this entire criminal empire, but he needs Ash's help for something very specific. This establishes Lance in the flesh, not only as a great trainer, but also as knowing his limitations and knowing where someone needs to step in to assist him. That maturity, I think, really will benefit Ash to look up to. We also get a sense that now that Lance has been introduced, we now have the goal. And Ash should know this. Lance is his endgame, essentially. Well, actually, Richie's his endgame, but Lance is the head of Elite Four. You get the idea. To be a Pokemon Master, you need to beat Lance. But the key player of this arc is neither Ash nor Lance. It's Brock. Brock's breeding and studying of shiny Pokemon should pay off, allowing him to track down Team Rocket to their central base of operations. Don't forget, Team Rocket is doing something to make the red Gyarados red, to force Pokemon into being shiny, and Brock's studies should come into play here. His knowledge will be instrumental in toppling Butch and Cassidy's new Team Rocket. Now, Lance and Ash will probably handle most of the busy work fighting Team Rocket, alongside Misty and Brock, but we'd also see Silver now working with Leaf to confront and overcome the final executives of Team Rocket. But they lose, only for one group of people to step in at the last minute to finish the job and beat Team Rocket for good: Jesse, James, and Meowth. You see, this would complete their arc. They've gone from common criminals, who are fairly pathetic, monsters, bad guys of the week, to heroes. When Ash and Lance fail, when Silver and Leaf fail, the heroes of the arc, the final heroes, should be the plucky, scrappy criminals that we've seen from the beginning of the show all the way here. Now, of course, this would leave a couple gyms left for Ash and Jimmy to face off and finish off, leading to the Silver Conference. The two trainers would face off against Claire in a sequence of episodes that illustrates how far both trainers have come, while also teasing the ferocity of Claire's older cousin, Lance. It'll be a great time to further develop Lance as the endgame adversary, and Claire can offer some viewpoint on how Lance grew up, on their upbringing, on their training. Again, further developing the endgame antagonist. I do think that Claire should still throw a little bit of a tantrum when she was beaten by Ash and Jimmy, like in the games. And that should be a good example to Misty on what not to do as a gym leader, kind of furthering her arc a little bit as well. But I do think that Claire should be a good point to say, hey, here's where the gyms end, here's where Lance is. And you kind of see the Dragon's Den and that whole world developed a little bit. In the wait for the Silver Conference, we'd see a miracle happening that Ash and friends would encounter. Ho-Oh returning to Ecruteak.
It's the bells. This can only mean that the legendary Ho-Oh will soon return.
On one hand, this would tie Ash's first encounter with Ho-Oh at the very beginning of the show to the build-up to the endgame. Reuniting with Ho-Oh, who has been lingering on the periphery of Ash's journey. Now it's here, to observe something. It's come here for a reason. Is Ash the reason? That might be your temptation, to say, oh, this is where Ash catches a Ho-Oh, thus putting him on par with Richie, but no. God, no. Why would you ever want that? That would totally throw off the balance of everything Ash has been working up to. Ash shouldn't capture a legendary right before the finale. He should be working with the Pokemon he's trained all this time, not some brand new smoking gun Deus Ex Machina. No, God, no. No, God, that's dumb. Rather, Ho-Oh touching down will lead to some cathartic moment for Ash, a moment of pure wonder and amazement. I think the Pokemon anime always did such a good job at doing. There are so many episodes of the anime where you just see these legendary beasts appear and materialize, and that's some cool stuff. For a moment, Ash might think maybe Ho-Oh is here for him. Ash is inspired, drawing meaning from this. He's maybe some way destined for greatness now that Ho-Oh has touched down and met him, and it's here that we introduce Harrison. Now, for those who forget, Harrison is the trainer who beats Ash at the Silver Conference in the original anime. This is after Ash beats Gary, he faces Harrison, and Harrison beats him with a Blaziken. And that sets Ash off to Hoenn. You get the drill. In the original anime, Ash and company met Harrison around the Ho-Oh shrine as well. Only this time, they had to stop a Sneasel that prevented people from capturing Ho-Oh's sacred flame. Here, however, his ties to Ho-Oh are a little more concrete. Harrison has the same personality, same team, same character, but we add one thing. Harrison also saw Ho-Oh when he set off on his journey back in Hoenn. And he's come to Johto to kind of in the same way Ash has. From one region, maybe he lost his, maybe he lost the Pokemon League challenge before, and now he's come back to Johto for a second chance. But he feels that Ho-Oh is there for him. And this gives Ash perspective. Every single person thinks they're destined for greatness. Everyone he has encountered has had dreams, big and small, which leads into the 5th movie. And this is the one we're changing the most drastically. Now, for those of you who've been listening this whole time, you may remember me mentioning a while back that Ash's father would come into play much, much later. You remember that? That vague figure in Ash's life? Well, this is the payoff to that. If you remembered, good job. Now pay attention. Ash's father disappears from Ash's life to pursue being a Pokemon trainer, and we know from just Delia's implication that he might have had a little bit of a rocky start, but we don't know where he went. We know people talk highly about Ash's father, but never in specifics, and Ash doesn't seem to really know much about his dad's journey either. We should feel Delia losing Ash's dad to this journey as something of a sad, unspoken thing. Something that bothers her, something that makes her wake up at night, reach for the pillow where there's no head waiting for her. Something absent, but we don't know what. Of the original Pokemon movies, the 3 of the films are Team Rocket-centric. The first movie, the 4th movie, and the 5th movie, at least originally. And we haven't really veered too much from that. In fact, we've added more Team Rocket. Well, this time we're taking Team Rocket out of the equation. Annie and Oakley, the bad guys Pokemon heroes, are not going to be in this film. Rather, I'm replacing them with someone different. The antagonist of the film, who tries to steal the Soldew, the soul of a fallen Latios, and incur wrath upon this obviously not Venice town, should be Ash's dad. And we're not making as many changes to the core plot as you would think. The plot would mostly flow the same, with a couple changes. For one, Ash's mom will go with Ash and company to Alto Mare. For another, Ash and Misty at this point have grown far closer, so their race at the beginning of the film, it ends with Ash and Misty maybe being a little more affectionate with each other. And for the third, most important thing that's going to be different, in the audience, when Ash and Misty end their race, a figure approaches them to congratulate them. Ash's dad. He's here. And this immediately adds an extra layer to the film that was never present before, with Delia and him trying to reconnect, and Ash feeling excited, but Brock, perhaps, who's dealt with a deadbeat dad who abandoned him, maybe a little more cautious. Maybe he's telling Ash, maybe, hang on, hold your horses, something's a little off here. But Ash is so excited he ignores him. Now, let's talk about Latios and Latias, because I feel like they don't need to change too much, but in fact, by not changing, they still add more dimension. As we learn in the film, Latios and Latias' father, a previous Latios, died protecting Alto Mare from an evil Pokemon trainer. And this establishes an immediate parallel between the original plot and the new plot. Latios and Latias had an absent father who died a hero. Ash has an absent father on a journey that shaped him into an antagonist, and we'll see how in a bit. So why is Ash's dad the bad guy of this film? Well, I want this journey to show a parallel between his journey and Ash's journey. He set off to be Pokemon Master, just like Ash, but failed. Again and again, he failed. Silver Conference, Indigo League, Orange Islands. Beyond that, Hoenn? Sinnoh? We don't have the names of these regions yet at this point in time because Pokemon Company hadn't made them yet, but he keeps traveling the world and failing, and out of shame, cannot return home without being a champion, without being a hero. So the way he sees it, he has only one goal left: gain power over the Soldew in order to manipulate and control Latias and Latios. With these legendary Pokemon, he can be a master, regardless of the consequences. He's so desperate for success, he ignores the impact his actions have on the world. Now, in the original film, Annie and Oakley, you break into that big machine thing that restores the dead evil Pokemon to life in order to take over the city, and they go mad with power, using the Soldew for that purpose. The way they break in is by using the Soldew, which is the very soul, which is I just told you about this. You know the story already. In the movie, Annie and Oakley break into a secret garden where Latios and Latias live in order to get the Soldew in the middle of this big fountain. But this time, I think Ash should invite his dad into the secret garden, trusting him, hoping to show him something incredible that he found. Partially it's Ash bragging to his dad, but also it's partially Ash wanting to share something special with his father. And Ash's dad takes advantage of Ash's kindness and takes the Soldew for himself in a moment of distraction. But the effects are immediate, and Maybe Ash doesn't see his dad snag the Soldew, but Latios does, and Latios attacks his dad. And from there, we see the film play out like it does, with Ash's father occupying the role of Andy and Oakley, using the machine to wreak havoc and prevent Ash and friends from assessing him, using the resurrected dead Pokemon as an evil army. And over time, there should be more of them, giving more chance for this grand finale of sorts. And of course, it will end with Latios sacrificing himself to stop the machine, and everything going as you'd expect. But now, once all that happens and Latios has passed on and everyone's acknowledged the sad sacrifice of this Pokemon, Ash and Delia would have one last confrontation with Ash's father, who would just bow his head in shame. And the message should be clear. This is who Ash could be, potentially. He can either be the self-sacrificing hero who defends the innocent like Latios, or a shell who tries to overcompensate for his failure. Now from here, we go to the League. Ash and Jimmy have 8 badges. Gary has 8 badges. Silver confronts Jimmy once more outside of the Pokemon League. And Silver's arc's complete. He's redeemed. He's done all he can. But he's in the audience. Everyone who's wrapped up their arc, like Jesse and James, Silver, Leaf, etc., they're in the audience at the Silver Conference watching what unfolds. And as we get to the Silver Conference, we should show characters who haven't shown up since Kanto or early Johto. Minor figures, all reoccurring characters who might be trainers now that Ash and company have to face. They can be off in the audience if they're not really combatants. There should be some early round matchups that pair up some interesting characters who we haven't seen paired up before. But ultimately, the top 48 should be characters we've encountered the most throughout Johto and beyond, with a couple reoccurring figures. Maybe Drake even shows up. Yeah, Drake from the Orange Islands to reestablish himself as a master. That'd be kind of cool. Jimmy and Ash would be sorted into separate blocks, and we'd follow their matches. We'd also follow Gary and Harrison as well as they advance, as well as Marina. Yeah, you remember Marina, right? Remember her? Jimmy's companion, Crystal, the Crystal stand-in? She would have gotten all of her badges too over the course of the series, forming a rivalry with Jimmy that would kind of mirror Misty and Ash's rivalry in a little bit. Now look, I'm gonna be honest, I find the idea of setting up a tournament bracket for these characters to be kind of a waste of time. Just assume they fight, alright? Just assume it's a bunch of cool fights. I don't need to be the specifics with that. All I need to talk about are the last couple of fights, because those are the most important ones. Now for one, Ash is going to fight Harrison in the semifinals, shortly after beating Gary. And the Gary fight should go much the same way it does in the original anime. I think that really works, but Ash has to fight Harrison after Gary, but this time, narrowly win. In the original anime, Ash narrowly loses to Harrison, but let's break that. There's a tradition in the Pokemon anime that Ash faces a trainer who's just better than him right after beating his rival at the Pokemon League. We need Ash to conquer his counterpart, because the finale, the last round, has to be Ash and Jimmy, the mentor and his young protege. And in this final battle, we'd see 2 protagonists of the Johto arc clash, with Ash narrowly winning. This sets Jimmy off to travel to Kanto to continue his training, with Ash using the lessons he's learned over the course of his journey to both win and confront Jimmy, to encourage him to keep on pushing, to keep on being better, and not to fall like his father did. And with that, Ash gets an opportunity to face off against the Elite Four and become a true Pokemon Master. Now this final arc would serve as the culmination of Ash's journey. This is where Ash and Misty's relationship will hit its culmination, with the two admitting their feelings for one another and kissing, maybe. Brock would talk about how Ash has raised his Pokemon right. Even Jesse, James, and Meowth, they'd admit that they've always admired Ash in some way. All of that will set up Ash as he waves goodbye to all the people he's known over the course of the show, all the people he's grown to love and care about, as he sets off for one last challenge. Each member of the Elite Four would represent a thematic challenge Ash has fought over the course of his journey. And yes, we'd still use the Kanto Elite Four at this point because that's what's been set up over the course of the 5 seasons thus far. Lorelei would serve to test Ash's confidence as a trainer. Bruno would serve to test Ash's work ethic. Agatha would confront Ash's fears and anxieties, especially relating to his past and future. And Lance's raw power and ambition, skill, the ultimate test, seemingly. And Ash would, again with extreme difficulty, over the course of his battles, overcome them all, and ultimately be granted one last fight. The champion. The finale would see Ash ascend Mount Silver alone. He'd see Ho-Oh in the distance, circling the mountain as the cold settles in, biting, freezing. He reaches the summit. Silence. There, standing at the very peak of Mount Silver, is Richie, now dressed in a way almost identical to Red. They turn, face each other in silence. Lugia perched behind Richie and Ho-Oh landing behind Ash. And they battle. We see the battle in rapid succession, with each of their Pokemon going blow to blow. Charizard versus Charizard, Ho-Oh versus Lugia. Both are evenly matched. We culminate in Richie's Sparky and Ash's Pikachu going at it, charging at one another, sparks flying like lightning bolts, scorching the heavens itself as they volt-tackle into each other, sparkling with enough energy to illuminate the sky, to send avalanches into the dust. We won't know who won. We just see Ash return from the mountain and be celebrated and embraced by his friends. We have an epilogue showcasing what each character did, with Gary taking over Viridian City Gym without Giovanni or Team Rocket to manage it. We see Misty become a gym leader, Brock a breeder, Jimmy take on the Indigo League, Leaf and Silver going off to work with Lance to stop criminal organizations, Jesse and James being married and comfortable off on the Orange Islands, and ultimately, Ash exploring rare and unusual Pokemon, but not before visiting his mom and friends one last time before setting out, promising to return with stories of his adventures. But the show wouldn't end yet, because we'd stop and cut to Hoenn, where a new trainer sets off, showing that we would continue with a new, younger cast for the first time. And that's what would happen if I had written Pokemon, if I held the keys to that kingdom. Again, it's not a perfect rewrite, and it's only my perspective on what I think would work best. And I'm sure you might have issues with what I just said, and that's great. Because this is not exactly me sitting atop a pedestal saying, oh, here's my decree of what should be and what shouldn't be. No, it's a discussion. And I think this discussion requires back and forth, especially if you're a creative mind who wants to try exploring their creativity in a way that's exciting and interesting. What would you have done differently? If you think I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. I'm more than happy to hear dividing answers, because at the end of the day, if you disagree with me, that only means you're exercising your creative ideas and coming up with new ways of analyzing and reevaluating media. And at the end of the day, media discussion should always be just that, a discussion. Maybe you think I stuck too close to the formula. Maybe you want to have me incorporate later ideas that didn't exist yet into this rewrite. Maybe you think I'm terrible for saying Ash and Misty should get together. And no, it's Dawn, or I don't know, Celine, or whatever. Maybe you think that Ash and Gary should have kissed at the end. Who knows? But the point is, you have ideas. Express them. Exercise those creative muscles in a way that embraces the conversation of media around us. This is a playground we can all play in. Let's do that. So maybe we want to continue the story with the new trainers who you can create, OCs of your own. That's up to you. But for me, for right now, I'm done. I gotta cut this off here because for me, the end of Johto really should be the end of Ash's core journey. Maybe bring Ash back if you're doing a rewrite further on. Quite frankly, this is my longest scripted videos, and I need to end it off somewhere. So if you've watched this far, thank you so much. I want to thank all my Patreons and YouTube membership supporters of all tiers. Without you, this would not be possible.
When we first started 25 years ago, we were in a little studio, and I think I posted a picture of it on Twitter some time ago. And it was a small room with a few people, and it just didn't seem like anyone else outside of that room in America had ever heard of Pokemon. And this was all before it went on TV. And all I could find on the internet was just a really little pixelated picture of Pikachu as evidence that Pokemon existed, and they were just all Japanese text websites, nothing in English. So I couldn't really research the show. But now that's all changed, very much so. And the fact that it has had such a positive impact with people, it's inspired them to be artistic and have communities and share it with their friends, and they've met their friends over their shared interests, and Pokemon was part of that. The fact that it went from our little group with a pixelated Pikachu to this huge community is unbelievable. It's incredible to me, and I'm very grateful to be a part of it.